At this time, I've asked Damon Sullivan to lead us in prayer as we begin.
Holy Father, thank you for this day. Thank you for your day of life that you bless us with. Thank you for the opportunity to assemble together and to study from your word. Whether it be John and getting prepared, the lesson of the word. Always seek to understand your word and to better understand your will for us. Thank you most especially for your son Jesus, for the sacrifice that he was willing to give. He was willing to shed his blood as he atoned for our sins. In his name we pray.
Amen. All right, as usual, I have managed only to get through 2 chapters on Sunday, leaving 4 chapters for today or thereabouts. So we're going to have to move really quickly, but let's see what we can do. So we're picking up in chapter 20 of Joshua, and at this point, all of the land has been allotted to the various tribes. And what did chapter 19 say, kind of at the end? Maybe it was actually a little bit earlier. I can't now when I want to put my finger on it, I can't find the verse. But Joshua had received his inheritance in Timnath Serah, and so basically everything else is done. Everyone has a place. And one of the phrases that we read was, "And the land had rest from war." So that's all pretty much behind them at this point. The next order of business is to designate these cities of refuge, and that's what's in chapter 20. So in verses 1 and 2 of chapter 20, it begins, which I think is remarkable. We'll talk about this for a sec. "Then the Lord spoke to Joshua, saying," now right there, I think something remarkable has happened, and it might be easy to be missed. The Lord spoke to Joshua, and I think we've read that before, but I wanted to pause right there and take note of that. Joshua was speaking with the Lord, or the Lord was speaking directly to him. Who else did God speak directly with? With Moses. And so when we read that the Lord spoke to Joshua, saying, "Speak to the sons of Israel, saying, designate the cities of refuge, of which I spoke to you through Moses," I was reminded back at the very beginning of Joshua, from chapter 1, verse 5, right after Moses died, God told Joshua, "Just as I have been with Moses, I will be with you." Just as I've been with Moses, I will be with you, which I think includes that direct communication, that direct relationship where God is going to speak directly to Joshua, the same as he did with Moses. I think that's a remarkable thing. Verses 3 through 6 then goes through and talks about, well, what were these cities of refuge for? And so, see, I thought it was working, and it's still doing the same thing. That's all right. I'm going to just push again. There we go. The 6 cities of refuge are set to serve as places of safety for those fleeing avengers of blood. What is the significance of the cities of refuge under the old law? So what have you got down on your sheets in answer to this question? Here's what they were for. Why is that significant?
Because usually when someone kills someone, it was eye for eye too.
Yep.
This gave another option.
Yes?
Allow time for trial to be conducted.
Yeah. It did allow for a time for a fair trial, right? Rather than, now this is not for, cities of refuge is not, if if you dented my car and I got really mad and I decided to wait for you as you came out of your door and, clonked you over the head and killed you, do I have any reason to run to the city of refuge? No, because it's not for that, right? It was only for cases of accidental death, what we would call accidental, or we would call manslaughter nowadays. All right, so one of the things that I think that is significant about the cities of refuge, they show that God is just, and also that God required a distinction between accidental death and premeditated death. That shows God's justice, that they are not the same thing. So if you cause the death of someone else, God does not look at that just the same as if you laid in wait for someone or killed someone, in a premeditated way. As you mentioned, it provided for fair treatment, so there was an opportunity to have a trial where the person could state their case and plead. They could present evidence. It gave evidence of the significance of life. So, as Dee mentioned, the requirement in cases of death was a life for a life. That's how valuable a life is. It takes another life. And you don't get the first one back, but that demonstrates the value of life. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a life for a life. What about this one? Did anybody write this down? Grace looked different under the old law versus the new law. What we understand grace to look like now is not exactly what it looked like back then. And this was one of the ways, this was kind of a foreshadowing, I think, of grace that was to come under the new law. So these cities of refuge, almost in themselves, are a type pointing toward Christ, a manifestation of grace. Also, the fact that they were open to anyone. Who could go to a city of refuge? Did you have to be a Jew? Did you have to be? No. Anybody. Any sojourner in the land, a traveler, a stranger, someone, an expatriate, whoever it was, they could go to these cities of refuge to pursue justice. And so if you imagine kind of that image of a city set on a hill, a city that is open to anyone who needs it to receive that grace. The other thing that I think is interesting about the cities of refuge, you had to stay there a while, right? If you caused an accidental death of someone and you fled to a city of refuge, you had to remain there as long as the high priest lived. That could be a long time. How about this? If we look at the parallel to the New Testament, when we now flee to the city of refuge, we are never going to leave because our high priest is never going to die. Isn't that interesting? All right. Verse 7, there were 3 cities in the land of Canaan, meaning the land on the west side of the Jordan River. So you had Kadesh up in Galilee in the hill country of Naphtali. You had Shechem in the hill country of Ephraim. Shechem was where Abraham had been before. He had offered sacrifices there. God appeared to Abraham at Shechem and promised the land. So that's kind of interesting. So you kind of see now, 450 years or so later, that promise being fulfilled in that place. This was also the place where Simeon and Levi's revenge took place, the revenge for the rape of their sister Dinah. That had long-lasting consequences, as we talked about on Sunday. And there are some who believe that Shechem is the same place as we read about later, the city of Sychar, which is where Jacob's well is. And That would be interesting if that is true, just partly because of what we talked about a moment ago. What was the significance of Jesus met somebody at a well there? And who was that? A Samaritan woman. A really godly Samaritan woman, right? No, not so much. What did she receive? Did she receive refuge? Yeah, she received refuge at that well. So I think that's interesting. Come on. It's the the clicker dance. There we go. All right, hang on. Okay, so we are looking, here's Shiloh, here's Hebron, that's one of the cities of refuge. Kedesh is up here, so way up north. So you had three cities here. There's Kedesh, there's Shechem, and there's Hebron. So you kind of see they're spaced out on the west side of the Jordan River. And it was also the place where David was anointed about 400 years after this. So it's kind of interesting when you think back in terms of the timeline from the beginning of our study. We're kind of right in the middle of the point where Abraham showed up and then where David is going to be anointed as king. It's also the place that Abraham had lived, had purchased the cave of Machpelah, where he buried his wife Sarah, and then where he was buried. So Shechem Hebron, we're talking about Hebron, was very important as well. I was like, where do I hold my hold my arm? Okay, moving forward. So then there were also 3 cities on the east side of the Jordan. What some people refer to as, if you see Transjordan in your Bible, that's what it means. It's across on the other side of the Jordan. And one of those was Bezer in the wilderness of the plain of Reuben. So now we're kind of down in the south on the east side. We're going to make kind of a U shape. So we had what was the first one? Kedesh, thank you. Kedesh, then you had Shechem and Hebron, and now on the east side you've got Bezer, Ramoth in Gilead, sometimes it's Ramoth Gilead, you might see it that way, which is a little further north, and then which is where Ahab died when he was fighting for that city and lost. That's going to come up in 1 Kings. And then you have the city of Golan in Bashan, up in Manasseh. Now it's just being difficult on purpose. All right, so on the east side, you've got Bezer right here. You've got Ramoth Gilead over here, and Golan up there. It's kind of interesting how they're pretty evenly spaced out. All right, chapter 21, in verses 1 and 2, now the Levites come to Eleazar the priest and Joshua and the heads of the households, and they have a request. What are they asking for? They're asking for places to live. So they know that God had commanded for them to live among the tribes. And so in verse 3, cities are given within the land that has already been allotted to the other tribes. And in verses 4 through 7, they go through and they actually cast lots again for the families of the priesthood. And so what we see there are the families of the sons of Aaron, the sons of Kohath, who is the second son of Levi, and the sons of Merari, and the sons of Gershon, who is the oldest son of Levi. So, Levi hasn't been alive for a long, long time. But these are the heads of those families, right? So each of those tribes, within the tribes, there were families that were still led by heads of the family, even for the Levites. Thought we had this all figured out. All right. I want to make sure I feel like I am skipping a slide when it moves so fast. All right. Question number 3. What's important about the 48 Levitical cities being dispersed among the tribes? Because that's how many there were. There were 48 cities and then the pasture areas around them that were dedicated to the Levites, and they were spread all throughout the other tribes' territories. What's important about that, or why is that significant? We already talked about that Levi would be scattered and would not have a territory of its own.
Maybe with their job being one of the more, I guess, important ones, it kind of shows like a priority. Like they're going to take some of, the Levites are going to take some of the others' land, and at first, the other tribes might not like it, but it goes to show that a sacrifice needs to be made for what's most important to God.
Sure. I could go along with that. I think that's a great answer. The Levites had a special role. They had a special job. And by kind of being spread out amongst the people, what does that do for all of the other tribes? What was the Levites' role in relationship to the other tribes? What do they do for those tribes that they cannot do for themselves? They sacrifice, right? They are that touch point with God. So they are essential to the worship, and they have special roles and special responsibilities that the members of the individual tribes are not meant to do, not able to do for themselves. It spreads God's influence out among the people. So we are all familiar with the scripture that says a little leaven leavens the whole lump. Well, that can work in a good sense too, right? A few Levites here and there are kind of good for everybody. It reinforces that the Levites are dependent. They don't have their own territory. They've got some cities. They have some places to live. They've got some places to, run their animals and that kind of thing. But they just kind of have their little spots here and there. They don't have a whole big territory to live as one group. And so they depend on their brothers from the other tribes. I think this is interesting when we think about it this way. Jacob pronounced a curse on his sons Levi and Simeon for their actions. Isn't it amazing how God is able to take something that could be a curse and turn it around and make it work, make it do something amazing? So this takes that curse of, the after effects of their actions and turns it into something really valuable, really important, and really special. Also, here we have the cities portioned out for each of the families. So the sons of Aaron get 13 cities. 13 cities go to the sons of Gershon. 10 cities for the sons of Kohath, and 12 for the sons of Merari. What two Levites didn't get any inheritance at all in the land? You have to kind of rewind a little bit. You have to go back in time just a little bit. Not yet. Not yet. Moses and Aaron. They didn't get any inheritance in the land. Aaron's sons do. Moses didn't get any inheritance in the land, right? All right. So the rest of chapter 21 just names all of the cities, all 48 of them, and where they are. In verses 43 to 45, let's take a look, because this is really where we see that it's kind of the next, things are starting to be fulfilled, right? Things are starting to be finished. And so it reads, "So the Lord gave Israel all the land which he had sworn to give to their fathers, and they possessed it and lived in it. And the Lord gave them rest on every side, according to all that he had sworn to their fathers, and no one of all their enemies stood before them. The Lord gave all their enemies into their hand. Not one of the good promises which the Lord had made to the house of Israel failed. All came to pass." So they've either overpowered or enslaved every enemy that was around them that they encountered. And this statement, "Not one of the good promises which the Lord had made to the house of Israel failed. All came to pass." I think this is something that's really remarkable even for us, because we see how people like Joshua, people like Caleb were so faithful all their lives, and they counted God as faithful. And we studied that last week when Caleb comes and says, "I was promised this, and it's been quite a number of years, but I was promised this, and I know the Lord will give it to me. I know the Lord will do this for me, and I'm ready." And he claimed his inheritance. He counted God faithful all that time. This statement reinforces that, shows how right he was to trust in God. Now, for us, we have been promised an inheritance too. Each one of us has been promised an inheritance. Think of yourself like Caleb. By the end of your life, if the Lord doesn't come before then, by the end of your life, you will have spent your life in service to the Lord, fighting and serving and taking care of what needs to be taken care of and living for him. And at the end of your life, you will remember the inheritance that was promised to you. And a statement like this helps us to be confident in God, that we recognize he's done it before, he's going to continue to do it, he's going to do it for me too. Any thoughts on that before we move forward?
Yeah, I was going to say, we see in Joshua chapter 1 and verse 8 that the book of the law shall not depart from your mouth. In so doing, you'll be prosperous and successful. And we see that this rest isn't going to stay, because we see in Genesis chapter 2, 12 and 13, twice declares the Lord that you've abandoned me. Then we go into the New Testament, we see in Matthew, as you were just alluding to, in Matthew 11, 28 through 30, "For those who are weary, come and learn of me, and I will give you rest."
Yeah.
And that's all he asks of us.
He wants to give it. He wants to give it. Very good. All right, so 1 Kings 8:56. We can take a quick look at that. If I was smart, I would have stuck a little piece of paper in there, but I didn't. 1 Kings 8 and verse 56. "Blessed be the Lord, who has given rest to his people Israel, according to all that he promised. Not one word has failed of his good promise, which he promised through Moses, his servant." All right. Yes, ma'am.
I was just going to say, I think it's a good reminder, too, that we really only have God's promises to fall back on. There were things that he did not promise them. He didn't promise it would be easy.
absolutely. It's a great point. All right. See, it jumps a little too far. All right. Success did indeed come from following God, but it didn't come quickly from our perspective. What do we learn from seeing God's promises all come true? It's basically what we were just talking about. The promise was first given to Abraham. It was carried through by Moses and also then Joshua, and through Joshua it was accomplished. That took a long, long time. For those promises, that was almost 500 years for that promise. There's another promise made to Abraham that has not, it has been fulfilled in large part already. But how long would it take before the other promise, the promise that through him all nations of the earth would be blessed, how long did it take for that promise to be fulfilled? Yeah, almost 2,000 years. It's a reminder that God is faithful, and it's also a reminder that time is different with God, right? What we think of as a really long time, not so long for God. Time is very different for God. Our perception is less important than God's reality. All right. Moving ahead. Chapter 22 then. We've got the tribes that live on the east side of the Jordan who had claimed their territory first before they crossed over and took Jericho and all of that. They are ready now because all the fighting's done and all of the land has been possessed and allotted. They're ready to go home at this point, and that's what we read here. You can read about back in Numbers chapter 32 about them claiming their land and getting set up there. So you've got Reuben, Gad, and East Manasseh ready to go back. They had obviously, set up their families. They had their herds or their flocks or whatever you can imagine they would have done some things to kind of set up housekeeping and before they went and helped in the military campaign. And so Joshua, in verses 1 through 4, pulls them all in and says that you have kept all that Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded you and have listened to my voice in all that I commanded you. You've not forsaken your brothers these many days to this day, but have kept the charge of the commandment of the Lord your God. And now the Lord your God has given rest to your brothers as he spoke to them. Therefore, turn now and go to your tents to the land of your possession, which Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you beyond the Jordan. And then in verse 5, he says, only be very careful to observe the commandment and the law which Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded you, to love the Lord your God and walk in all his ways and keep his commandments and hold fast to him and serve him with all your heart and with all your soul. So Joshua blessed them and sent them away, and they went to their tents. All right, where have we heard that before? Only be very careful, or be very careful and then only be very careful. Where have we heard that before? And why the repetition? What does it sound like? What does it remind you of? It reminds me of that, where Moses told Joshua, God told Joshua, be strong and courageous. Be very strong and courageous. Back in chapter 1 is where you'll find that. So verses 6 through 9, Joshua blesses them and sends them home. Verses 7 through 9 read, now to the 1/2 tribe of Manasseh, Moses had given a possession in Bashan, but to the other half Joshua gave a possession among their brothers, westward beyond the Jordan. So when Joshua sent them away to their tents, he blessed them and said to them, "Return to your tents with great riches and with very much livestock, with silver, gold, bronze, iron, and with very many clothes. Divide the spoil of your enemies with your brothers." And the sons of Reuben and the sons of Gad and the half-tribe of Manasseh returned home and departed from the sons of Israel at Shiloh, which is in the land of Canaan, to go to the land of Gilead, to the land of their possession, which they had possessed according to the command of the Lord through Moses. And then it's all looking so good, and something happens. If we can turn the page. There we go. See? We'll figure this out one of these days. All right. So here's a map that just shows where those territories are. Remember that this is only half of the tribe of Manasseh. Look how big. That son of Joseph, they'd done very, very well. So this is where they're going. So Shiloh is right around here. They're just going to cross back over and go onto the east side of the Jordan. So what was the situation in verses 10 through 20? What's the situation that happens that causes nearly civil war to break out? They built an altar. And wouldn't you know, somebody gets part of the story, gets part of the truth, and runs home and tells everyone else. And what do they think is going on? Oh, brothers, they've gone towards their homes. And they stopped and they built an altar. Oh, what are they doing? What are we doing? What did they think they were doing? They thought they were sacrificing not to God. They thought they were already, wow, that didn't last very long, right? That warning had just been given to them. Only be very careful to do. And, wouldn't you know it, somebody gets the wrong idea. So they build an altar on their way back. What is it that the leaders of the other 10 tribes are afraid of? Retribution on all of them. Why would they think that might happen? Do they have any reason to think that maybe they'd all get in trouble if something like this occurred? So what are they thinking of? They mention it. There's a couple of things they mention. The sin of Achan is one. What was the other one? Bless you. Verse 17, "Is not the iniquity of Peor enough for us, from which we have not cleansed ourselves to this day, although a plague came on the congregation of the Lord?" So the iniquity of Peor, you'd have to go back to Numbers chapter 25 to find that. We can look really quickly, unless anybody knows right off the top of their head what that was. What was it that happened at Peor? It was. Chapter 25 of Numbers. While Israel remained at Shittim, the people began to play the harlot with the daughters of Moab. For they invited the people to the sacrifices of their gods, and the people ate and bowed down to their gods. So Israel joined themselves to Baal of Peor, and the Lord was angry against the Lord. So it wasn't just sexual immorality, it was turning away from God. It was idolatry, right? And so then there was a plague, and 24,000 died. That was a bad deal. And then Achan, we remember him from more recently. Achan's the one who couldn't help himself, but he had some sticky fingers when they took Jericho, and that led to their defeat at Ai. So this is what the tribal leaders are afraid of, and they don't want that to happen. And so when they catch up with them and they're ready to go to war, they're like, no, wait, let us explain. We built this as a witness. We built this as an altar so that when we pass by it and when our children in the future wonder, we can show them this and we can we can tell them the story and we can recount to them what all this meant. Verse 29, you see this phrase, far be it from us. That's going to come up again. Far be it from us to be doing anything against God. Far, far be it from us. I think it's interesting to note this concern for future generations. And we've touched on this already with Caleb, for example. I might have even put that in there. Why is it maybe appropriate to be thinking about that next generation, especially in light of what we've seen?
It was the same thing when they crossed the Jordan with the stones.
Mhm.
Because the people that had seen so much, seen so many miracles, so these new generations were not seeing the one they did.
That's right.
So by making this altar, or by the stones that they did in Jordan, they were showing that God is.
There's a record, right? There's a kind of a record there. We can go back and it'll still be there and we can show our children. If you look at verses 30 through 34, it explains, so when Phinehas the priest and the leaders of the congregation, even the heads of the families of Israel who were with him, heard the words which the sons of Reuben and the sons of Gad and the sons of Manasseh spoke, it pleased them. And Phinehas the son of Eleazar the priest said to the sons of Reuben and the sons of Gad and the sons of Manasseh, today we know that the Lord is in our midst, because you have not committed this unfaithful act against the Lord. Now you have delivered the sons of Israel from the hand of the Lord. Then Phinehas the son of Eleazar the priest and the leaders returned from the sons of Reuben and from the sons of Gad and the land of Gilead to the land of Canaan, to the sons of Israel, and brought word back to them. And the word pleased the sons of Israel, and the sons of Israel blessed God, and they did not speak of going up against them in war to destroy the land in which the sons of Reuben and the sons of Gad were living. And the sons of Reuben and the sons of Gad called the altar Witness, for they said, it is a witness between us that the Lord is God. All right. Chapters 23 and 24 in a nutshell. In chapter 23, Joshua warns the leaders because he starts out by saying, I'm getting real old. He knows his time is not long, and so he warns them not to turn away from God to any other influence. This is going to be a problem. We know that. This is going to be a problem for them because not absolutely everyone and their influences had been purged. But he says, I'm old. I want you to see. There's a couple things he wants them to see. See, the Lord fought for you. See, the Lord fought for you in verse 3. And see, I have apportioned for you. Right? So he wants them to remember these things as evidence. All right. There we go. Verse 6, be very firm. Do not turn to the right or the left. Does that remind you of the straight and narrow a little bit? It does me. Do not associate, do not mention, do not swear, do not serve, do not bow. Well, that seems pretty clear in verse 7. How could anyone mess that up? Well, and in verse 8, he tells them to cling. But you are to cling to the Lord your God as you have done to this day. And a point that I really want to get to before the bell rings here is coming up. He says in verse 12 and 13, if you ever go back, then the Lord will not continue to drive out the nations from before you. There'll be a snare, a trap, a whip, and thorns, and you'll perish off this good land. Verse 14, he wants them to know something. Know in your hearts and in all your souls that not one word of all the good words which the Lord your God spoke concerning you has failed. All have been fulfilled for you. Not one of them has failed. And then he explains the consequences of their unfaithfulness should they turn away from God in verses 15 and 16. And in chapter 24, kind of his farewell address, he brings everyone to Shechem. And this is where the passage that we're all very familiar with comes up. And so you can read verses 2 through 13 on your own, but he connects their experience to what they've been told. And something I was listening to that I want to share with you real quick from Barry Kirschville when I was studying for this, the choose this day whom you will serve. That's what he tells them. And that's, some of us probably have that on a thing on our wall, like in our kitchen or our living room or whatever. We do at our house. Choose this day whom you will serve. The point that he wants them to make about this. What happens if you end up needing to make that decision every day, over and over again, rather than making it once for all time? He says you'll have just enough religion to make you really miserable. So think about that this week. Maybe when you're thinking about starting your new year, your resolutions or what have you, choose this day whom you will serve so that you don't have to choose it tomorrow and the day after that and the day after that. It's not a question anymore, right? That's the point that I wanted to make. All right. Thank you for your good attention, and it'll be back to Aaron on Sunday.